So if this video you get a notification for, cool, go back on my channel. I've been posting a lot, so make sure to check that out. And yeah, that being said, let us get started. Now to I guess officially start out the video. No, this isn't a history of the game of basketball. It's more of a history of the NBA. Now, of course, in 1891, the game of basketball was created by James Naismith, who at the point in his life he was a YMCA gym teacher. I guess he was trying to figure out a new way for, of course, physical activity, and came up with the idea of putting some beach baskets up on some, I guess, a high enough place, and to throw a ball in it, creating the game of basketball. What's actually kind of funny is that the first ever official, well, not official, but the first time him testing out his new game, the score to that game was 1-0. Yes, they played to a score of 1-0. At a point in time, dribbling was not even allowed in the game of basketball. You can look up the rules of basketball if you want to, sort of like the first set of rules, and some of them are extremely funny. Now, I'm assuming Mr. Naismith thought the game of basketball to be somewhat similar to a game of like football, soccer/football, to it being sort of a low scoring, high energy type of game, like again, football, soccer. But it turns out, obviously, many decades later that we're at right now, it's a completely different game. Scorings go up to sometimes 130, 140 a game. Usually nowadays, 120 points per game isn't that crazy to think about. But him, when he first created the game of basketball, was more looking towards a game of a couple baskets per game, which is kind of crazy to think about. But then the sort of new, I guess, craze sport was on the rise, mostly from pretty much high school to even some early collegiate schools from around the area started taking up the game of basketball and running with it. Now, obviously, over that time period, the rules started to change. Dribbling was involved, and the game became more of a fast-paced game, even though it's probably would be extremely slow to today's standards. But it started to shape a form of today's basketball standards. Now, again, sort of grew from a little pickup game you could play with friends to high school to college to even having some local sort of teams being formed to play the game of basketball, but nothing too formal until they formed the leagues. That actually wouldn't be taken into place until 1937, and it's the NBL. Yes, the NBL, not the NBA. But also during that same time period, there was another league called the BAA, the Basketball Association of America. Now, you can sort of see this as, if you are a wrestling fan, sort of the Monday Night Raw and the WCW feud that went on during the time period of the 90s. It was sort of the same thing. Two obviously very similar sports, pretty much the same thing, battling out for popularity. But over time, they just decided that merging would just be easier for both parties. So a merger came along. Another competitor came up, the ABA, which is probably the league, if you know basketball, you're sort of more familiar with. much to sum it all up, they all joined together, joined forces, and created the NBA that we sort of know and love today. Now, again, that was back in sort of later in the 1970s. Let's go back a little bit, and talk about sort of the eras of basketball. Now, you can sort of chunk up the NBA in different eras of basketball. You can kind of do that with all sports. And you can sort of sum up the first era of real basketball, you could say, would be the Bill Russell Boston Celtic era of basketball, which what I would call it would be, the real start of the NBA. Now, before that, there was maybe about 20 years of actual basketball, but again, that was, kind of yikes type. Those were like the Minneapolis Laker era of basketball, and, you maybe had a star here and there, but, like, not really. They were, really early on, like the 40s and 50s. It's kind of whack, you know what I mean? They didn't really get the traction. They were still trying to become more popularized in major sports cities. It was more of a small town type of league. Getting in more to the 60s and early 70s, when it really started to pick up a little bit more traction, even though it was still a very dark time for professional basketball. Now again, sort of going into the 60s, the Celtic era, 1957, the Boston Celtics acquired Bill Russell in that draft. Now I think, if I remember, Bill Russell was actually a draft night trade. Yes, they didn't officially draft Bill Russell, they actually acquired him, which is actually kind of wild to think about, but it's actually really cool. So, basically, for many years, even throughout his rookie year, all the way throughout, Bill Russell, as we know, is an 11-time NBA title winner. What a legend. Honestly, him, Bob Cousy, Red Auerbach, who was the coach and the leader, basically, of the entire Boston Celtic franchise, rallied this team to be the biggest dynasty in sports history. You could even say, again, Bill Russell played his entire career in a Celtic uniform, won 11 titles, and most of them were back-to-backs and this and that, and just dominating his entire career with this team. And in my opinion, it probably is the most dominant professional sporting league team maybe of all time, which is super impressive. You could say obviously it was due to very much satire, NBA talent during that time period. Of course, there were other legends. Again, I was talking about Bob Cousy, but he was his teammate, so that was kind of weird. Wilt Chamberlain at the time was really the most dominant force, you could say, in the NBA, but again, very satire players in the NBA at that time. He never really got the true, you could say, legend sort of story that Bill Russell has, because again, team and just where he was located, just had a lot of bad luck during that time period. But you could definitely see that early sort of 60s era was just really dominated by your boy Bill Russell, which is really cool. Like, now again, during this time period, basketball was mostly a Midwest popularized sport. The NBA was really trying to gain traction, because at this time period, I know I just said before that, the Bill Russell era, the Celtics, it really did help the NBA to a certain degree, but it was still pretty much a dying sport as a brand, as a televised company. It just wasn't making money, so they decided to move a lot of teams to different areas. We talked about the Minneapolis Lakers moving to Los Angeles. That's definitely a good way to brighten your way to get exposure for your league. Also, the Philadelphia Warriors moved to San Francisco. The Syracuse Nationals moved to Philadelphia. So Syracuse, no offense, Philly's probably a little bit bigger of a popular city. Then you have the St. Louis Hawks moving to Atlanta. You even had the Chicago Packers. Yes, the Chicago Packers, I said that correctly, moved to Washington, D.C. Again, moving from more inner cities that are, decently sized to the big boys, the big cities, and really trying to gain traction and popularity, not only because of A, wanting to show the game off more, but B, the league desperately needed more money to stay alive. And with also the league desperately needing to stay alive, the talent, like I was talking about, desperately needed help. And that really came into fold players. It probably gets kind of old and stale. Having a new guy like him come in was probably really great to see. Also, coming in with the merger of the NBA and the ABA, Dr. J made his way back into the NBA, becoming, again, the star that we know and love from the 70s to the early 80s. Really helped out to sort of popularize the game as well. Not only for, just to popularize because of how skillful he was, but also just popularized for major cities, especially on the East Coast. Man, Dr. J was probably the most popular player in the NBA at a certain time period, and definitely deserving of that. Now, at this point in time, the NBA grew to 18 teams. We had the Portland Trail Blazers, Cleveland Cavaliers, the Buffalo Braves, which, again, eventually moving from Buffalo to Los Angeles, at least nowadays, they are in Los Angeles. They moved to a couple different cities. Debuted, which is obviously great for the early 70s. Then you had the New Orleans Jazz, who were also a team that sort of got relocated to a different area, but still, you started to see the NBA growing traction, growing their league, which was, again, desperately needed, but even continuing growing, adding teams like the Spurs, the Nuggets, the Pacers, the New York Nets. It still wasn't working with great legends like Kareem, we just talked about with Dr. J, Moses Malone, Artis Gilmore, Alvin Hayes, George Gerving, Pistol Pete Maravich. A lot of stars that we, at least if you watch basketball, know and love today. The league was just still in such dire help. It says here that the end of the decade of the 70s going almost into the 80s was terrible. They saw a decline in TV ratings, lowest attendance, and drug-related player issues. Also, a lot of fights going on, and not only publicly on the court, but privately in locker rooms and even with management and owners. The league looked like it was on its dire heels, and it was very obvious at that time period, which is really sad to think about because, again, I just read off a bunch of players' names that are absolute legends and players that a lot of other players look up to as being the GOATs of the NBA, but man, this time period wasn't probably very fun to not only watch basketball, but be a part of basketball, which is really sad to think about when you're growing a sport that is maybe one of the most popular sports in the entire world right now, which is actually pretty crazy. So this first part of the video is a hopeful but very sad part, but that is where we get to the late 70s, early 80s of basketball. Now, there are three things that happened in the 80s that were very important. In 1979, the NBA actually added a ABA rule, finally, which, again, the ABA was, again, probably the more exciting league to watch because the ABA actually had a three-point line that they added to their own courts. The NBA finally decided to add that to the NBA in 1979. But also what happened? Two things. Number one, in the same year, 1979, rookies Larry Bird and Magic Johnson got drafted. Boom, boom. And like I said before, we had the Bill Russell Celtic era. We sort of had this very downhill, trying to at least have some sort of grasp on the NBA in the sort of 70s. And now in the 80s, we have the Magic and Bird era of basketball, which is, my opinion, the renaissance, the boom of NBA basketball that really, man, if they did not come into the NBA or didn't have careers, didn't have the storyline, didn't have whatever, that it didn't go the exact same way, man, I don't know where basketball would be today. It would probably be, no offense to any other sports, but, they would be below maybe some of the other sports that we have in today's NBA. I mean, in today's sports world, they kind of like, just from what I know about American sports, obviously football is top dog. It will always be top dog, but other than that, basketball may be the second most popular sport. You can say baseball, but it's definitely an argument. If this didn't happen, there would probably be zero argument for that. Now, the feud actually started in their collegiate days. They actually went against each other for the NCAA March Madness title back in 1979. I think Magic won that game. Actually, I can look it up right now. I'm trying to think. Yeah, Magic won 75-64. Indiana losing. Instantly started a feud between these two highly star-studded as the face of the NBA. Magic Johnson being maybe at least one of the most charismatic characters to ever have been on a Major League Sports team ever in all sports. He had the smile, the charisma, he had the talking ability, the skill to show it as well. He was everything that basketball needed at that time. A face. The league needed something to be excited about. Then a bunch of, no offense, no-named players on a bunch of no-named teams finally started to create a buzz around the NBA, and what really made it exciting, upbeat, and, Showtime Lakers. There's a great rivalry. Larry Bird and that rugged Boston Celtic team. It was a crazy time to be a basketball fan during that time period. And obviously following behind them were just stars that were just everywhere with Isaiah Thomas. I mean, Kareem was still a dominant player during this time period, and Moses Malone was still dominant during this time period. The sort of rise of Clyde Drexler and Dominique Wilkins, and the NBA finally started to get these stars that had not only talent but also that little extra pizzazz to really make them stars, and not just good players for a sports team. They were stars. They were exciting to watch and to learn and to go see and spend money to watch. So obviously Magic and Larry Bird, again, a video I can make an entire hour-long video on, and maybe I will one day. But to make this short and sweet, the Magic and Bird era of the 80s just completely catapulted the NBA to where it is today. Now, in the 80s, there is also a player. Michael Jordan was drafted in the infamous 1984 NBA draft, and just took everything that Larry and Magic had, but put it into one face. And again, it's the drafting of Michael Jordan. Now, that did happen in the 80s, but I tried to sort of skip over that a lot because, again, Michael Jordan is what we're going to be talking about the 90s. But, I mean, he was a part of the sort of early 80s renaissance, like I was just talking about, being a star that finally the NBA was desperately needed. Now, again, the NBA did have its run with Magic and Larry and really let that go on until, again, they were competing to titles until 1987, I think I just said, 1987. After that, you can definitely tell that they started to dwindle down. Career injuries, obviously Magic Johnson and his big, sickness that fell upon him and his retirement and that whole thing that went on in the NBA. Definitely at the later half of the 80s, you can see it was like, okay, now what? What is next? What is there? There were a bunch of really great NBA players, like again with Michael Jordan and Clyde Drexler and new and up and coming guys with Patrick Ewing, and Charles Barkley was really starting to find his own on his own, and you can definitely see that the NBA was waiting. There was like a buzz waiting for the next big thing, and that was obviously Michael Jeffrey Jordan. And this sort of buzz came to a big closing during the 1992 Olympic Dream Team. Now, this doesn't really correlate to the history of the NBA, but more to the history of basketball. It connects it because the 1992 Dream Team was not only what made basketball, again, as popular as it is today, but really became the shining moment of when Michael Jordan really put his name as, I am not only the best basketball player on the planet right now, but I am the face of basketball. Like, when you think of basketball, you think of Michael Jordan. When you think of Michael Jordan, you think of basketball. It's two and two. They're hand in hand. In 1992 was it because you could just tell that Michael Jordan was just better than everyone else on a team with the best players on the planet. So he sort of correlated to himself, and everyone else on the team agreed, Michael Jordan, this is your league. Minnesota Timberwolves all became teams during that time period, so not bad. So bring a total of 27 NBA teams to the NBA. Obviously, not a lot of great players could play on each and every team. Like if you think about nowadays, if you don't have, 3 almost stars in today's NBA, you're not even a title contender. Back in those days, if you had one really good player, you're set in stone. You have a chance, and definitely during this time period was a great time to be good. Because if you were good, you were dominating the NBA. Now, with the 90s, again, we just talked about before, Clyde, you had Jordan, David Robinson won an MVP, Patrick Ewing, Chris Mullin, Charles Barkley, John Stockton, Karl Malone. The 90s were star-studded with big-time name talent, and again, sort of helped save the NBA. Is what we all know and love today. Michael Jordan carrying the NBA to not only to the masses of the United States, but around the world, I think was what really helped the NBA to where it is today. Not only thinking about it in, nationally, but internationally, bringing the NBA to everyone. And I wish I could go into more detail about the 90s, but it was Michael Jordan. That's the two-word explanation of the 90s I could give. Michael Jordan. Now, during this time period, again, the NBA saw a little bit of a plateau in popularity, and it really took a hit. The game wasn't as popular as it was before, definitely during the second retirement of Michael Jordan, and then even his time with the Washington Wizards, which he did end up joining in the early 2000s. You can just tell the NBA wanted a new face, wanted more excitement, and it was hard to find during this time period. Now, in the late 90s, there were some great players, definitely, like Shaquille O'Neal, that really became, one of the most dominant players in the NBA's history, maybe is the most dominant player, and at one point in time, I would say, in the 2000s, he was the best player in the NBA, winning 3 titles for the Lakers, and also having a great teammate with him in Kobe Bryant. So, the early 2000s, even going into the mid-2000s, you could definitely say there wasn't that sort of same pizzazz and buzz around the NBA like there was in the 90s. You can say that maybe because due to, again, not so much of a talents, you could say, during that time period. Again, a team's best player during the 2000s was maybe the second best player or third best player on some of the teams we know and love today, and that's just how the NBA was during that time period. And again, that's not anything wrong, but a 6-man in maybe some teams in today's NBA would be the star of a lot of franchises during that time period. So, when teams were good, they were dominant. So again, like the Lakers, dominant. The Spurs, dominant with Tim Duncan and Greg Popovich and those great minds of the Spurs winning multiple titles. The early 2000s was again a sort of time period of dominant team dynasties. The Lakers and the Spurs, early 2000s. That is what you need to know. The West was just an absolute powerhouse of a conference. You could not do anything to them. It was the Lakers and the Spurs, early 2000s. It was insane. So yeah, definitely the 2000s, Spurs and Lakers. You had a couple of teams sneak in there to get a title, like the Miami Heat, the Detroit Pistons, but to sum up the 2000s, it was Kobe Bryant and the dominance of the West is a good way to sum it up for like a little history thing. Nothing really major happened until 2003, and a very important NBA draft happened, kind of like again with 1984, having some crazy stars into the league. 2003 is just as arguably as good, because that's what we have. LeBron James. Yes, LeBron James. For a lot of LeBron haters out there, you might not like this, but you could definitely say the 2000s, great teams, great players, but the 2008, maybe even 2007, till about 2016, you could say, for almost a decade, LeBron James was the NBA, and the NBA had another face, and it was LeBron, the chosen one, the next great, the next Michael Jordan, which definitely at the time period it seems kind of disrespectful, because I would say at least the 2000s was the era of Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant was the face of the NBA, and of sad that even in 2003, they were already calling up the next one up, and it was LeBron James. Now 2003, you had LeBron, you had D-Wade, Carmelo, Chris Bosh, just so much hype around so many players that were coming to the NBA and basically going to be known as the next greats, and they did, in my opinion, really show up a whole lot, and it's known as one of the greatest drafts in NBA history. So that happened in 2003, and going into the 2000s, going into the 2010s, LeBron really made a name for himself, even carrying a very lousy NBA franchise in the Cleveland Cavaliers to the NBA Finals against, again, the dominant teams of the West, maybe of the entire decade during the 2000s. The San Antonio Spurs, man, they got swept, and it was very obvious that LeBron James, A, didn't have enough help, and no doubt they would have lost, but B, that LeBron was serious, he was legit, and he was going to be the best player in the NBA, and he showed that. Now, of course, if we're talking about going into eras, and we're going into the 2010s, we gotta talk about the decision being one of the most infamous sort of spots in NBA's history, because this is where NBA free agency is how we know it today. Player empowerment is the pretty much the name of the game nowadays. Players run organizations. It's not the other way around. Players run the organization. That is most because of LeBron and the decision. Now, again, we just talked about LeBron James in Cleveland, having the best player in basketball to face the NBA. Not being in a competitive state is not good for the NBA. It's not good for business, and it's really not good for individual players like LeBron James. You could say for yourself, it's loyalty, it's this and that, which is cool, and I love that. Nowadays, it's way easier, but in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, it's a lot harder of an argument to sort of win over. So, LeBron James decides he needs out, decides he needs help, and goes to Miami to form a great team. You could call it a super team with D-Wade, Chris Bosh in Miami, forming the big three, the Beatles, the Heatles, you should really call them, and the 2010 start, and it's dominated by LeBron. LeBron is the 2010s. He goes to multiple straight NBA finals. I think it was somewhere, like 10 straight finals was LeBron. Like, I'm not even kidding. He was in every single NBA finals, and deservingly so. He was the best player on the planet. Every year, making more and more sense of him being in that name of being one of, if not the GOAT of NBA basketball. Now that obviously goes on to the entirety of the mid-2010s, going to 2015, 2016, where we go to, you could call it modern NBA, or you could call it what it probably will be called 10 years from now. And we're going to be talking about the Warrior Dynasty, which is kind of tying into modern NBA basketball, because again, in the year 2015, the Golden State Warriors, Steph Curry, makes their first title appearance and wins it against LeBron James. Now, this was a huge stepping stone for not only the NBA finally having an answer to LeBron James and finally having a great sort of new rivalry with LeBron, Steph Curry, the Cavs, and the Warriors, but it was a whole entire different NBA with Steph Curry, because this 2016 Steph Curry took the league by storm, and the insane three-point shooting began. The insane sensation of shooting the ball at half court, the love for three-point shooting has just got turned on to times 3,000. It was insane, most because of Steph Curry, and now an entire new generation, like with LeBron, have started to look up to a certain player and play style, and that is how the NBA is going to look from now on until there's someone else who changes the way the NBA game is played. And the game is fast, it's three-point shooting, and that's mostly because of the influence of Steph Curry. Is it good or bad? That is your own opinion, but the Golden State Warrior era happens. Now they do end up losing the championship in 2016 due to 3-1 with LeBron James, and that arguably being maybe the greatest finals ever won, coming back from being down 3-1. After that, the Warriors have never looked back, because again, always short of winning a couple more. And now we look at them today, another championship. They are the modern NBA. They are the Dynasty. They are the Chicago Bulls of this generation. And it's crazy that we're living in it because, again, they've put together maybe some of the greatest teams we've ever seen in NBA history. So, yeah, I think it's a pretty good sort of like fast way to do it. I don't want this video being too long, and I probably already took in way too much time. But yeah, the modern NBA, the Warrior era, it's over. Maybe soon. We'll have to see. They just won the title, so we're gonna have to see where it goes on from here. But now, we have up and coming guys like Cade Cunningham and Chet Holmgren and Paolo Banchero and man, who else is there? Zion, Luka, Giannis. All these guys are the modern NBA, where they'll take the game as where we talked about earlier with the 80s with guys like Michael Jordan coming into the NBA and Clyde Drexler and blah blah blah. Saying, hey, where are these guys gonna take the NBA? Took them to pretty good heights. So we're sort of in the same era where we have the most talent we've ever had ever in the NBA, and we'll have to wait and see. So yeah, I don't know if that was a really good sort of explanation on sort of the history of the NBA. I didn't want to do like, okay, well this year this team won, and this year this team won, and this year this team won. I didn't want to make a video about that. I just kind of wanted to give out a little bit of my own sort of rendition of, the history of the NBA and how I would tell it. And it really does go through eras of basketball from, again, we talked about the creation of basketball, Bill Russell, Kareem, the Bird and Magic era, Jordan, the early 2000s, which was an interesting time in basketball. If you were alive and watching basketball then, it was cool, but like it wasn't to where it was many years later. Obviously the 2003 NBA draft, the draft class, and the dominance of LeBron, now to this Golden State Warrior era, and now the modern NBA. It's really exciting. So I guess I sort of told it in like an era timeline, if that makes any sense. So anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video.